Madam Web is a glorious movie for a myriad of reasons. The fourth, and not the last nor the penultimate entry into Sony's Spider-Man universe, released on Valentine's Day of this year, February 14th. If you're a stuck-up millennial or a disrespectful zoomer punk like me, you might just remember Madam Web from Spider-Man the Animated Series, Peter Parker's answer to the acclaimed and similarly titled Batman the Animated Series. Over the course of the show's run from 1994 to 1998, multiple characters, including those thought more obscure, were introduced to audiences. One of these such characters was Cassandra Webb, or as she's more popularly known, Madam Web. The character is an enigmatic blind seer who first introduces herself to Spider-Man in the second chapter of the Sins of the Father saga, Make-A-Wish. Although the episode is among the sweeter along with its arc, the character is quite unnerving, stalking Spider-Man and drafting him into a mysterious future conflict. Nevertheless, this particular incarnation of the character warrants a film that, in all honesty, no one ever really expected to be made, and that has certainly in part contributed to the paltry box office returns thus far. That, and the scathing critical reviews deriding the film as a nonsensical romp replete with offbeat performances, questionable writing, and CGI on par with Beast Wars, not to be confused with Rise of the Beast. As we approach the end of the film's second week in theaters, with all the movie's professed shortcomings in mind, I cannot recommend this movie more, and the critical reception is a sizable reason why.
What?!
That likely sounds like a complete and absolute oxymoron, so hear me out. I've compiled a list of 3 reasons why I believe that despite, or perhaps because of, the rabid hatred from elite columnists, you should spend your hard-earned money to see Madam Web. No major spoilers. This movie is a blast, and the performances do a lot in making that happen. From the very first time we see Dakota Johnson on screen as Cassie, we are given a perfect grasp on the tone. If you fancy yourself a socially awkward mess or an inveterate introvert, you will find part of yourself in her character. She is so uncomfortable interacting with her fellow humans, and her inflections are so uncanny. Everything about her delivery is absolutely iconic in this part, and while sitting in the theater laughing at the spectacle before me, I honestly began to think that she could one day be thought of as the female Christopher Walken, and I mean that entirely as a compliment. She's also carried that strangeness over to interviews promoting the film. I'm not sure if it's intentional on her part, but I'm here for every second of it myself.
Don't need to worry about having any predetermined ideas or information about...
No, you don't have to know anything about anything at all to watch this movie.
Should I know, like, what ambulances are?
No.
Like, okay.
You will learn.
You're gonna learn? Wow. So this is really
You
like
don't
an
gotta know
educational...
nothing. It's great for America.
That'd be the funniest thing to put on a poster. Like, you don't gotta know nothing. Yeah, you don't need to know nothing about nothing.
You know nothing? Come see our movie.
Though they're not paired for the entire movie or even most of the runtime, Adam Scott's smartass Ben Parker, yes, the future Uncle Ben, works off of her delightfully. His deadpan wit perfectly complementing her frazzled eccentricity. While I would have loved to have seen them toss well-meaning jabs at each other for a little while longer, especially considering that there's some potential romantic feelings implied, which I think opens a whole door of possibilities. This strange, antisocial person who has no earthly idea of how to deal with children is effectively forced into the role of a surrogate mother to 3 girls orphaned by their circumstances, and that is where the magic really begins because she has no clue what she's doing. I think part of it is the generational divide both on screen and in real life, which Dakota has addressed.
You're a millennial. There are 3 other actors in this film who are Gen Z, and that kind of is one of the relationships in the film, is how a millennial would react to Gen Z. How did you actually like your Gen Z cast members, your co-stars?
I love them.
Yeah.
And they annoy me.
Yeah. They annoy you on a generational level, like how they're experiencing life.
Yes.
Yeah. What's something, when do you feel...
The main villain of Ezekiel, played by French-Algerian actor Tahar Rahim, is also just so... incredible. He isn't dubbed by another actor, but his lines often don't seem to match his lips, which is apparently a consequence of doing automated dialogue replacement, or ADR, to re-record dialogue in a different environment. This is used when, say, a Mack truck audibly goes by outside the studio, or someone on the crew knocks something over and the original audio is ruined. Well, my audience definitely noticed. Several people were just openly laughing when he was on screen at different times. His delivery is on par with that of everyone else, but the Godzilla-esque contrast between what he was saying and how his mouth was moving puts him in his own league. Don't think that the acting is the only fun part of the movie, however, because the setting and aesthetic definitely lend themselves to the enjoyment factor as well. The film mostly takes place in 2003, and it leans fully into its world in more ways than one. Aside from the obvious nods to the time, Toxic by Comrade Britney plays over the dance scene for one, like Morbius before it, the movie just overall feels like it was released in the early 21st 21st century, which is really refreshing. Look, I can enjoy the gripping melodrama of a Joker or the intelligent gender commentary of a Barbie as much as the next person, but sometimes it's nice to simply have a good time at the movies and turn one's brain off for a little while. And the added nostalgia of being taken back to the early noughts, as Brits would say, is the cherry on top. The media has relished the fact that this movie has ostensibly no hope of spawning a sequel, practically salivating over dubbing the film a franchise killer. I love to rain on their parade, but S.J. Clarkson, the director, has been open from the beginning that it was always intended to be a standalone. There was never going to be a Madam Web 2, and that's fine. Going back to my intro, no one ever expected to see a Madam Web origin story at all. Most normally moviegoers don't know anything about her character beyond that she's somehow connected to Spider-Man. This isn't a Venom situation where you have a popular anti-hero with a medley of interesting stories from the comics ripe for adaptation. Now that we've got the story of where Madam Web comes from and how she got her powers, what else is there left to see? The character has never been known for epic physical action or complex plots focusing on her as the primary protagonist, and it was admittedly a stretch that we got what we did. So if anything was milked from her in a starring role, there's a good chance that it would make for a terrible, boring movie-going experience. If anything, the film sets up for 3 awards for a potential Spider-Woman movie or appearances in Spider-Man 4, which is currently rumored. Sydney Sweeney, Isabella Merced, and Celeste O'Connor are hitting their stride in the entertainment world, so it's not like their success is tied to the movie's failure, especially if they show up in a Disney MCU project. Sweeney is perhaps the most famous of seemingly crushed upon by virtually every Zoomer who is so inclined, but the other 2 are well on their way to being able to carry their own films to box office success. Bottom line, this is probably your one chance to see a Madam Web film on the big screen, and particularly if you're a comic book fan, you shouldn't waste your opportunity to bear it witness. Oh boy. I do my best to stay positive on this channel, and I don't want to drift into ad hominem territory, but movie critics frustrate me greatly. Let me be clear, there's nothing off limits about film criticism, and big production studios, or small creators for that matter, are not precluded from negative feedback, but the fact of the matter is that a handful of stuffy elitists are responsible for what you get to see. This warrants its own video, which I hope to get around to at some point, but to put it simply, by forming a consensus on new movies, professional film critics have the power to determine whether a movie succeeds, and it becomes clearer by the year that they are exceptionally out of touch with the average Joe. Look at the stark contrast between reception to The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker. While critics heralded the former and audiences held it in much more negative regard, the inverse is true of the latter, notwithstanding a more muted backlash against Episode 9 by some factions of people. To a lesser extent, critics were inexplicably far warmer towards the dumpster fire that was Velma, whilst audiences of all backgrounds and creeds rightly rejected it as an insult to Scooby-Doo fans as well as viewers in general. Morbius was disparaged as one of the worst movies of all time, even though it received decent to positive reception from the general public. Most pertinently, Madam Web has found a following on the internet, and in fact seems to be fairly liked. It would be remiss not to mention those critics who have broken from the prevailing narrative on the movie, but they have been shouted down by most of their peers. To see the rot that has overtaken this industry, look at the venom that was spewed at Chris Stuckman for refusing to join the rabid dog pile.
I know how hard it is to make a movie. I do not know how hard it is to make a movie under the studio system. I was able to make an indie film without a giant corporation breathing down my neck, which is not the privilege that S.J. Clarkson had when she directed Madam Web under Sony, which I can only imagine was monumentally difficult. This is not going to be a video about Madam Web and telling you whether or not you should see Madam Web. There are plenty of people on this platform, as well as a website dedicated to aggregating reviews and giving it a number that's going to inform you of that, and you can choose to listen to those voices if you want. The information is out there.
If we continue to follow the direction of those who don't understand us, we'll never get what we want to see. Instead, Hollywood will continue to pilly us with mainstream-approved drivel and humdrum stories that are firmly detached from the real world. If you see Madam Web for no other reason, make it to send a resounding message to the critics. You don't decide what I like, and what I enjoy is entirely different from what you prefer. All in all, I thought Madam Web was a super time. If you had the money or can make it on a matinee day, I think it's well worth watching thanks to its campy fun, its originality, and the unique opportunity it presents to defy the established order. I should say the movie obviously isn't perfect, and I did take issue with major aspects of the project, such as the bait and switch we got with every character except for the villain neglecting to wear their costumes for a bulk of the runtime, despite advertisements suggesting otherwise, in addition to some missed opportunities to dive deeper into lore, but those critiques shall be saved for my deep dive into the film, which will come sometime after it's released on physical media. Speaking of which, it's entirely possible this movie will enjoy a new life on streaming just as Morbius did following its release on Netflix. Speculation has suggested we may see a Netflix arrival as soon as August of this year. If you're unable to make it to theaters before it departs, I would, as you can expect, encourage you to give it a watch at home when you get the chance. At the end of the day, Madam Web is a thrilling recollection of early comic book films and does not deserve to be lost in the multiverse. Thank you all so much for watching. Like and subscribe if you'd be interested in seeing my aforementioned in-depth look at Madam Web coming in the soon-to-be-determined future, or the other nerdy content I produce, including more videos focusing on the world of comic book media. Also, please consider contributing to my Patreon if you can. As I've said in my other videos, I'm a broke former college student transitioning to a career online, so I would really appreciate the help, so long as it's convenient for you. Link in the description. Until next time, this is Jamie with Carnival Entertainment, saying...
He was in the Amazon with my mom when she was researching spiders right before she died.